Jake Harlow never fit in. He was born on a small mining colony orbiting Titan, one of Saturn's moons. Life there wasn't easy. People worked hard, lived hard, and died even harder. From the time he could walk, Jake learned how to fight first. For food, then for respect. School wasn't his thing. Books didn't interest him. What mattered most was surviving another day. When he turned 17, Jake decided to leave Titan behind. The United Earth Defense Corps offered free transport off-world if you signed up for 5 years of service. For someone like Jake, it sounded like a good deal. No more cold nights staring at the stars through cracked windows. No more fighting over scraps with other kids in the tunnels. Just a chance to start fresh. Signing up wasn't hard. They didn't ask too many questions. All they cared about was whether you were strong enough to carry a rifle and follow orders. Jake passed both tests easily. A few weeks later, he found himself crammed into a transport ship with hundreds of others, heading towards some distant battlefield he'd never heard of before. The training camps weren't anything special. Most days involved running drills, learning how to shoot, and listening to officers bark commands until your ears rang. Jake wasn't the smartest guy in camp. He couldn't calculate orbital trajectories or memorize alien languages like some of the recruits who came from fancy academies back on Earth, but he had something else: instinct. Years of living rough taught him how to think fast and move faster. When things got tough, and they always did, he didn't break. He adapted. War broke out not long after Jake finished training. The enemy was called the Zalari, an insectoid species that hated humans almost as much as they hated being alive. They attacked colonies across the galaxy, burning everything in their path. Its leaders scrambled to send soldiers wherever the fighting was worst. Jake ended up on a barren planet called Kyrax 7, a wasteland of red dust and jagged rocks. It wasn't glamorous work. His job was simple: hold the line until reinforcements arrived or die trying. No one expected much from Jake. To most people, he looked like any other grunt. Average height, average build, average skills. Nothing stood out about him. Even his commanding officer barely noticed him during roll call. If anything, Jake seemed like the kind of guy who would vanish the moment trouble hit. That's what everyone thought anyway. But Jake didn't care what others believed. He kept his head down and did his job. Every mission, every patrol, every firefight he survived. While better-trained soldiers fell around him, Jake stayed standing. Sometimes it was luck. Other times it was pure stubbornness. Whatever it took, he made sure he walked away when the smoke cleared. One day, Jake's squad received orders to secure a ruined outpost on the edge of Zalari territory. Intelligence reports claimed the area was abandoned, but no one trusted those reports anymore. Too many missions had gone sideways because someone higher up got lazy with the details. Still, orders were orders. So Jake and 12 others loaded into a dropship and headed out. The ride was quiet except for the hum of engines and the occasional cough from someone nervous about what lay ahead. Jake sat near the back, checking his gear one last time. He didn't say much to the others. Talking only wasted breath. Besides, none of them really knew each other well enough to share stories. They were just names on a roster, thrown together by circumstance. When the dropship landed, the air outside was thick with heat and dust. Jake stepped onto the ground, rifle ready. Scanning the horizon, the outpost loomed in the distance, a collection of crumbling buildings surrounded by rusted fences. It looked dead, but appearances could be deceiving. Everyone moved cautiously, sticking close to cover as they approached. Inside the outpost, the silence was eerie. Dust covered every surface, and shadows stretched long across empty rooms. Jake's squad split up to search for supplies or anything useful. He paired with a young woman named Clara, one of the newer recruits. She seemed jumpy, constantly glancing over her shoulder like she expected something to jump out at her. "You okay?" Jake asked quietly. Clara nodded but didn't answer. Her hands tightened around her weapon. Jake didn't push her. He understood fear. Everyone felt it sooner or later. Some handled it better than others. Some didn't handle it at all. They reached a storage room filled with crates. Most were empty, but a few contained ammunition and rations. Jake signaled for Clara to grab what she could while he kept watch. As she bent down to pick up a box, a faint buzzing sound echoed through the building. Jake froze. His eyes darted toward the doorway. The sound grew louder, sharper, then came the click-squick. Mechanical noises that sent chills down his spine. Zalari comms. They weren't alone. "Move," Jake whispered urgently, grabbing Clara's arm. She dropped the box and followed him as he sprinted toward the exit. Behind them, the buzzing turned into a roar. Shadows flitted past windows. The Zalari were coming. Jake shouted a warning into his radio, but static crackled back. Either the signal was jammed, or the rest of the squad was already gone. There was no time to check. The aliens burst into the hallway, their armored bodies gleaming under dim light. Their mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound that made Jake's stomach churn. He fired first, aiming for the closest target. The shot hit true, dropping the creature instantly. Clara screamed beside him, firing wildly. Bullets ricocheted off walls. As the Zalari charged forward, Jake pulled her back, yelling for her to focus. She tried, but panic gripped her tight. One wrong step, and she tripped, falling hard onto the floor. Jake hesitated for half a second. Helping her meant risking his life. Leaving her meant certain death for both of them. Without thinking, he grabbed her arm and hauled her upright. Together, they ran. The corridor twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the complex. Jake knew they couldn't outrun the Zalari forever. They needed a plan. Spotting a narrow maintenance tunnel, he shoved Clara inside and followed close behind. The space was cramped, barely wide enough for them to crawl. The Zalari wouldn't fit not easily. Anyway, for now, they were safe. Or as safe as anyone could be with monsters hunting them just feet away. Breathing heavily, Jake leaned against the wall, clutching his rifle. Clara sat beside him, tears streaming down her face. "We're going to die here," she whispered. "No," Jake said firmly. "Not today." He didn't know how they'd escape. He didn't have a map or a backup plan. All he had was determination and maybe a little bit of hope. Enough to keep moving. Enough to survive. Outside, the Zalari scoured the outpost, searching for prey. Inside the tunnel, the humans waited, hearts pounding, minds racing. Jake knew one thing for sure: if they made it out alive, nothing would ever be the same again. The tunnel was dark and cramped, but Jake didn't let himself think about it too much. Thinking led to fear, and fear slowed you down. Clara sat beside him, still shaking, her breathing uneven. He could hear the faint sounds of the Zalari moving outside, clicking mandibles, heavy footsteps, and the occasional screech as they tore apart the outpost looking for survivors. "Stay quiet," Jake whispered, his voice low but firm. "They're close." Clara nodded, though her wide eyes told him she wasn't sure she could keep calm. Jake didn't blame her. Fear was natural. Everyone felt it in moments like this. The trick was learning how to push past it. Jake had spent years doing just that. On Titan, he learned to survive by staying sharp and thinking fast. Those lessons were all that kept him alive now. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the noises outside began to fade. The Zalari were moving on, searching elsewhere. Jake waited a little longer, listening carefully for any sign of movement. When he was certain the coast was clear, he crawled toward the exit of the tunnel, motioning for Clara to follow. The air outside was cooler than before, though the red dust still clung to everything. Jake scanned the area quickly, checking for threats. The outpost was trashed, its walls scorched and broken. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, his squad mates torn apart by the Zalari. Jake clenched his jaw, forcing himself not to look too closely. There would be time to mourn later if there was a later. "We need to move," Jake said. Turning to Clara, she looked pale but nodded. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her grip on her rifle. Jake didn't say anything about it. Everyone reacted differently to combat. Some froze, others fought harder. For now, she was still standing, and that was enough. They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. Jake knew the Zalari wouldn't stay gone forever. These creatures were relentless, always hunting, always searching. If they found even a trace of human activity, they'd swarm like insects defending their hive. As they crept through the ruins, Jake spotted something glinting in the distance, a damaged Zalari comms relay. It was half buried in rubble, its metal casing cracked and sparking. Most soldiers wouldn't have given it a second glance. To them, it was just another piece of alien junk. But Jake saw potential. "Wait here," he told Clara, crouching behind a pile of debris. She hesitated, clearly unsure whether she should stay or follow. Jake gave her a sharp look. "I mean it, stay put." He moved quickly, keeping low to avoid drawing attention. Reaching the relay, he knelt down and examined it. The device was complex, covered in strange symbols and blinking lights. Jake didn't understand most of it, but he recognized enough to know it was still partially functional. With some luck and a lot of improvisation, he might be able to use it. Jake rummaged through his pack, pulling out scraps of wire and tools salvaged from earlier missions. He picked up the habit of hoarding useful bits and pieces during training. Back then, it had seemed pointless. Now, it might save both their lives. Clara watched nervously from her hiding spot, glancing around every few seconds to check for danger. "What are you doing?" she whispered when Jake finally returned. "Buying us some time," he replied simply. He didn't explain further. There wasn't time for explanations. For the next hour, Jake worked feverishly, splicing wires and rerouting circuits. His hands moved with practiced precision. Even though sweat dripped into his eyes and his muscles ached from tension, Clara stayed silent, watching him with a mix of awe and confusion. She'd never seen anyone work like this before, especially not someone who looked as ordinary as Jake. Finally, the relay flickered to life. Jake tapped a sequence into the keypad, using coordinates he'd memorized during briefings. Then he hit send. A burst of static filled the air, followed by silence. Jake exhaled slowly, hoping the message had gone through. "What did you do?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I sent fake intel to the Zalari command." Jake explained. "If I did it right, they'll think our reinforcements are landing somewhere else. That should buy Earth a few more days to prepare." Clara stared at him, stunned. "You can do that." Jake shrugged. "I figured it out." It wasn't arrogance talking, it was survival. In situations like this, you either adapted or died. Jake had no intention of dying today. They didn't linger. Long after that, Jake knew the relay's signal could attract unwanted attention, gathering what supplies they could carry. They set off toward the extraction point several miles away. The journey was brutal. The terrain was rough, littered with jagged rocks and deep craters. Every step kicked up clouds of fine red dust that stung their eyes and clogged their throats. By the time they reached the rendezvous zone, both were exhausted and dehydrated, but no one was waiting for them. Jake cursed under his breath, scanning the horizon. The dropship was supposed to arrive hours ago. Either it had been delayed or worse, destroyed. Without transport, they were stranded, trapped on a hostile planet with no backup and dwindling resources. Now what? Clara asked, her voice trembling. Jake didn't answer immediately. He studied the landscape, calculating their options. They couldn't stay here. The Zalari would find them eventually. Moving on foot was risky, but staying put was suicide. "We keep going," he said finally. "There's an old research station, 30 clicks east. If we can reach it, we might find shelter, or at least a way to call for help." Clara looked doubtful, but didn't argue. She trusted Jake, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, calm and steady, even when everything fell apart. Or maybe it was because he hadn't given up yet. Whatever the reason, she followed him without question. The trek to the research station was grueling. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the ground until it felt like walking on hot coals. Their water ran out halfway there, leaving them parched and weak. Jake pushed through the discomfort, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. He encouraged Clara to do the same, offering words of reassurance whenever she faltered. "You're doing great," he said when she stumbled over a rock just a little farther. She forced a smile, though her lips were cracked and bleeding. "Thanks." When they finally reached the station, it was a wreck. The main building had collapsed, its walls reduced to rubble inside. Debris blocked most of the rooms, making navigation difficult. Still, it offered some protection from the elements and possibly the Zalari. Jake led Clara to a corner of the structure that seemed relatively intact. They huddled together, conserving what little energy they had left. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a bitter cold that made their bones ache. Jake wrapped his jacket around Clara, ignoring his own shivers. Neither slept much. Every sound outside made them tense, ready to run or fight. But the Zalari didn't come. Not that night, anyway. By morning, Jake had a plan. Using parts scavenged from the ruined equipment, he managed to repair a broken comm unit. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough to send a distress signal. He transmitted their location repeatedly, hoping anyone would pick it up. Days passed. Food became scarce, and their strength waned. Just when it seemed like hope was slipping away, a faint hum echoed in the distance. Jake scrambled to his feet, squinting against the sunlight. A small shuttle descended from the sky, its engines kicking up clouds of dust. Claire grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face. "We're saved." Jake didn't celebrate just yet. He knew better than to trust appearances. As the shuttle landed, he raised his rifle cautiously, scanning for signs of trouble. When the hatch opened, however, relief washed over him. Human faces greeted them, grimy and tired, but unmistakably human. Harlow, one of the pilots, called out, recognizing him. "Is that you?" Jake lowered his weapon slightly. "Yeah, it's me." The pilot grinned, shaking his head. "Damn, we thought you were dead." "So, did I," Jake muttered, helping Clara aboard. The ride back to base was quiet. Clara rested her head against the wall, drifting in and out of sleep. Jake stared out the window, watching the barren landscape disappear beneath them. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel victorious. All he felt was tired. When they arrived, medics rushed to examine them. Officers demanded reports, asking questions Jake didn't have the energy to answer. Eventually, someone handed him a blanket and told him to get some rest. He nodded gratefully, collapsing onto a cot in the barracks. As he drifted off, Jake replayed the events of the past week in his mind. He'd done what he had to do, survived, improvised, and protected those who depended on him. Nothing more, nothing less. To everyone else, he was just another grunt, another name on a roster. But deep down, Jake knew something had changed. Somewhere along the way, he'd proven something not just to others but to himself. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't perfect, but he was alive. And as long as he kept breathing, he'd keep fighting, because that's what grunts did. They held the line. They endured. They survived. And sometimes, just sometimes, they won. Jake Harlow woke up to the sound of boots clanking against metal floors. The barracks were alive with activity, soldiers rushing back and forth, officers barking orders, and techs huddled over glowing screens. For a moment, Jake just lay there, staring at the ceiling. His body ached from days of nonstop movement, and his mind felt foggy, like it hadn't caught up yet. But he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't dead. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. Someone had given him clean clothes, a standard-issue uniform that smelled faintly of detergent, and left a tray of food beside his cot. The meal was bland but edible: protein paste, stale bread, and a cup of lukewarm water. Jake didn't complain. After weeks of scavenging scraps on Chirac 7, this felt like a feast. Clara was nearby, sitting on another cot with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked better than she had during their escape cleaner. Calmer, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything they'd been through. When she noticed Jake watching her, she gave him a small smile. "You saved us," she said quietly. Jake shook his head. "We saved each other." She didn't argue, though her expression suggested she didn't fully believe him. To Clara, Jake was something more than just another soldier. He'd done things she couldn't understand, things most people wouldn't even think of doing, like hacking an alien comms relay or leading them across miles of hostile terrain without losing hope. To her, Jake wasn't just a grunt. He was a survivor. But to everyone else, he was still invisible. Words spread quickly about what happened on Chirac 7. At least, parts of it did. The official report credited the success of the fake intel to unknown factors and praised the bravery of all personnel involved. No one mentioned Jake by name. No one connected the dots between the damaged relay and the sudden retreat of Solari forces near Earth's outer colonies. As far as command was concerned, it was just dumb luck or maybe divine intervention. Still, rumors began to circulate among the lower ranks. Soldiers whispered about a lone Marine who outsmarted the enemy, who turned the tide of battle with nothing but scraps and determination. Some called him the Shadow. Others referred to him simply as that guy. Whatever the nickname, the stories grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the barracks. Jake didn't pay much attention to any of it. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition. What mattered to him was staying alive and keeping others alive too. If people wanted to talk about him, fine, just as long as it didn't get in the way of doing his job. A few days later, Jake was summoned to a meeting with Colonel Hayes, a stern woman known for her no-nonsense attitude and razor-sharp focus. She sat behind a desk cluttered with maps and datapads, her sharp eyes studying Jake as he entered the room. "Harlow," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I hear you've been busy." Jake shrugged, taking a seat. "Just doing my part, ma'am." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Your part? You hacked an alien communications system, diverted an entire fleet, and survived a week in hostile territory with minimal supplies. That doesn't sound like just doing your part." Jake didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd never been good at explaining himself, not to people like Hayes. Anyway, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. "Listen, soldier," she continued. "We're in the middle of a war. Every advantage counts. And right now, you seem to have a knack for finding those advantages. So here's the deal. I'm putting you on special assignments. High risk, high reward missions. Think you can handle that?" Jake hesitated. Special assignments meant stepping out of the shadows, working directly under the spotlight. It meant more responsibility, more pressure. But it also meant making a bigger difference. Finally, he nodded. Double quotes, "Yes, ma'am." Hayes smiled faintly. "Good. Report to Lieutenant Carter tomorrow morning. He'll brief you on the details." The first mission came sooner than expected. Jake found himself leading a small fire team into Nova Delphi, a strategic outpost deep within Solari territory. The objective was clear: capture an energy node that powered the aliens' defense grid. Without it, their forces would be vulnerable to attack. The operation started smoothly enough. Jake's team moved quickly, avoiding patrols and disabling traps along the way. But as they approached the node, things went sideways. A group of Zalari warriors ambushed them, forcing the humans into a desperate firefight. Outnumbered and outgunned, the team fought fiercely, but casualties mounted fast. Jake took charge, shouting orders and covering his teammates as they regrouped. One by one, they pushed forward, inching closer to the target. When they finally reached the node, Jake planted explosives around its base, setting a timer for 10 minutes. Then he turned to his team. Fall back, he yelled over the chaos. I'll hold them off. His teammates hesitated. They didn't want to leave him behind, but Jake gave them no choice. He fired a burst of shots toward the advancing Zalari, forcing them to take cover. Go, he shouted again. Now, reluctantly, the others obeyed, retreating down the corridor as explosions rocked the chamber behind them. Jake stayed behind, reloading his rifle and preparing for the worst. The Zalari swarmed in, their mandibles clicking furiously. Jake aimed carefully, picking off targets one by one. Each shot counted. Each second mattered. When the timer hit 0, the energy node exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave knocked Jake off his feet, sending him sprawling across the floor. Debris rained down around him, and smoke filled the air. For a moment, everything went silent. Then voices broke through the haze. Human voices. Jake opened his eyes to see Lieutenant Carter and a squad of reinforcements rushing toward him. They helped him to his feet, patting him on the back and shouting congratulations. The mission had succeeded. The energy node was destroyed. The Zalari's defenses were crippled. Back at base, the mood was celebratory. Soldiers cheered and clapped Jake on the shoulder, calling him a hero. Even Colonel Hayes offered a rare nod of approval. For the first time, Jake received formal recognition and note in an official report praising his leadership and tactical skills. It wasn't much, but it was something. Still, Jake didn't let it go to his head. He knew what mattered most wasn't medals or commendations, it was results. Lives saved. Battles won. Anything else was just noise. Over the next few months, Jake became a ghost in the system. Deployed quietly, pulled out faster than anyone could ask questions. Officers requested him for every major operation, knowing he delivered when it counted. Rumors about the shadow grew louder, spreading beyond the ranks of enlisted soldiers to reach higher levels of command. But not everyone was happy about it. Some officers resented Jake's rise. To them, he was an anomaly and unpredictable element they couldn't control. They tried to bury him again, assigning him to routine patrols or logistical duties. But Jake refused to fade into the background. Wherever he went, the tide turned. Not because of weapons or ships, because of belief. The Zalari began to notice. 2. Intercepts revealed mentions of a human soldier who always seemed to be 2 steps ahead. Someone who struck fear into their ranks. Someone they couldn't track but could feel. They called him the Whisper. Jake heard the nickname once, during a debriefing session. Someone joked about it, saying it sounded like something out of a bad action movie. Jake just smirked and kept quiet. He didn't care what the enemy called him. All that mattered was staying alive and keeping humanity alive. As the war dragged on, Jake's legend grew. Stories spread of a lone Marine who defied odds, outsmarted enemies, and inspired those around him. Some claimed he was invincible. Others said he was just lucky. Either way, one thing was certain. Jake Harlow wasn't just another grunt anymore. Would you like me to format this into a separate document, e.g. .docx or .pdf? Let me know. The war with the Zalari had reached a breaking point. Earth's outer colonies were falling one by one, their defenses overwhelmed by relentless alien assaults. Billions of lives were lost in days. Panic spread across humanity like wildfire. Refugees fled to overcrowded ships bound for Earth, hoping to escape the slaughter. But even Earth wasn't safe, not anymore. Jake Harlow was deployed again, this time to a doomed outpost called Delta 9. It was a tiny station on the edge of Zalari territory, barely worth defending. Command didn't expect it to hold there. Orders were simple: extract vital intel before total collapse. If possible, destroy as much enemy equipment as you could along the way, then get out alive. But Jake arrived too late. When his dropship landed, the outpost was already overrun. Fires burned everywhere, lighting up the night sky with an eerie orange glow. The air smelled of smoke and metal. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, human and Zalari alike. Most of the structures were reduced to rubble. Whatever resistance had been here was gone. Jake stepped off the ship, rifle in hand, scanning the area. His squad followed close behind, their faces tense with fear and uncertainty. They weren't trained for this kind of mission. None of them. "We're ready to face what waited inside those ruins, sir," one of the soldiers whispered, pointing toward the main building. "What do we do?" Jake hesitated. He could see the logic in retreating. There was no way to win here. Staying meant certain death. Leaving meant living to fight another day. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was the thought of letting the Zalari walk away unchallenged. "We stay," he said finally, his voice firm. "We finish the job." His squad stared at him, shocked. One of them opened their mouth to argue, but Jake cut them off. "If we leave now, they'll regroup and hit us harder next time. We stop them here or we die trying." No one argued after that. They trusted Jake, even if they didn't fully understand why he chose to stay. They knew he wouldn't lead them into danger without a plan. The first step was finding cover. Jake led his team through the wreckage, sticking to shadows and avoiding open spaces. The Zalari were everywhere, swarming like insects over the remains of the outpost. Their clicking mandibles echoed through the ruins, a sound that made Jake's skin crawl. Every movement had to be precise. Every breath had to be silent. Inside the main building, Jake found what he was looking for, a central hub filled with alien tech. It wasn't just weapons or supplies, it was data. Information about Zalari troop movements, supply lines, and attack patterns. If Jake could download it and send it back to command, Earth might have a fighting chance, but accessing the system wasn't easy. The interface was complex, covered in symbols Jake didn't recognize. He worked quickly, using tools from his pack to bypass security protocols. His hands moved with practiced precision, though sweat dripped into his eyes and his muscles ached. From tension behind him, his squad held position, keeping watch for any sign of trouble. They fired occasional bursts to keep the Zalari at bay, but ammunition was running low. Sooner or later, they'd run out, and when that happened, they'd be overrun. Jake ignored the sounds of battle, focusing on the task at hand. Finally, the system unlocked. Data began streaming onto his datapad. He uploaded it to a secure channel, sending it directly to command. Then he set explosives around the hub, preparing to destroy everything. "Let's move," he shouted, grabbing his rifle. His squad fell back, following him as they retreated deeper into the ruins. Behind them, the explosives detonated, sending shockwaves through the building. Fire engulfed the central hub, consuming everything inside. For a moment, it seemed like they might make it out alive, but then the Zalari counterattacked. Dozens of them poured into the ruins, cutting off escape routes and surrounding Jake's team. Bullets flew in every direction. Shouts of pain and anger filled the air. Jake fought fiercely, taking down as many enemies as he could, but numbers didn't matter anymore. There were too many Zalari, and not enough humans. One by one, his squad mates fell. Soon, only Jake was left standing. He backed into a corner, reloading his rifle for what felt like the 100th time. His body screamed for rest, but he couldn't stop now. Not yet. He aimed carefully, firing shot after shot until his weapon clicked empty. Then he drew his knife, gripping it tightly as the Zalari closed in. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Jake spotted an opening, a narrow tunnel leading underground. Without hesitation, he dove into it, disappearing into the darkness. The Zalari hesitated, unsure whether to follow. By the time they decided to pursue, Jake was long gone. The tunnel led to an old bunker buried beneath the outpost. Jake sealed the entrance behind him, buying himself some time. Inside, he found scraps of food, water, and medical supplies, enough to survive for a few more days if he was careful. Over the next 72 hours, Jake stayed hidden, listening to the sounds of battle above. The Zalari searched for him relentlessly, tearing apart the ruins piece by piece, but they never found him. He was a ghost, slipping through their grasp like smoke. When the fighting finally died down, Jake emerged from the bunker. The outpost was silent now, its streets littered with bodies and debris. He moved cautiously, checking for survivors. There were none. Only death remained. Before leaving, Jake did one last thing. Using a damaged comms relay, he broadcast a message across all known frequencies. It wasn't just data this time, it was a statement. Images of fallen humans flashed across the screen, their faces blurred except for one. Jake Harlow, the Zalari, saw it. So did Earth, and everyone else. Later analysis revealed something chilling. Intercepted transmissions from high-ranking Zalari. Officials referred directly to Harlow by name. They'd learned to fear him, to hate him, to hunt him. Jake didn't care. All that mattered was surviving, and as long as he kept breathing, he'd keep fighting. Because that's what grunts did. They held the line. They endured. They survived. And sometimes, just sometimes, they won. Would you like me to format this into a separate document? .docx or .pdf? Let me know. Jake Harlow returned to Earth as a shadow of himself. Physically, he was intact, bruised and battered, but alive. Mentally, though, he felt hollow. The weight of everything he'd seen and done pressed down on him like a mountain. He didn't talk much about what happened at Delta 9. No one asked. They just nodded when they saw him. Their eyes filled with respect or maybe fear. Either way, Jake didn't care. He wasn't looking for recognition. All he wanted was to keep moving forward. But the world had other plans. The message Jake broadcast from Delta 9 spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't just military channels that picked it up, it was civilian networks too. People saw his face, heard his name, and connected the dots. Stories began circulating online, shared by soldiers who'd served with him and survivors who owed their lives to his actions. Overnight, Jake became a simple name whispered in bunkers and shouted in streets. At first, command tried to ignore it. They didn't want heroes. Heroes made people ask questions. Heroes demanded answers, but the public wouldn't let it go. Protesters gathered outside government buildings, holding signs with Jake's name. Parents painted murals of him on walls. Children wrote essays about how they wanted to grow up to be like him. Even the media couldn't resist. Reporters dug into classified files, piecing together fragments of Jake's service record. Every mission, every victory, every moment of defiance, they found it all. And they published it. Headlines screamed his name. Asterisk the grunt who saved humanity. Asterisk meet Jake Harlow, Earth's last hope. Asterisk Colonel Hayes called Jake into her office one morning. She looked tired, her usual sharpness dulled by stress. You're becoming a problem, she said bluntly. Jake shrugged. I'm just doing my job. That's not enough anymore, Hayes replied. People see you as more than a soldier now. You're a legend. A rallying cry. If we don't control this, it'll spiral out of hand. Jake frowned. What do you want me to do? Disappear? Hayes hesitated, then nodded. For now, yes. Lay low. Let things cool off. Jake didn't argue. He knew how the system worked. Fame was dangerous and wartime. It distracted from strategy, shifted focus away from what mattered. So he stepped back, retreating into the shadows once again. For weeks, no one heard from him. Some assumed he'd gone rogue. Others thought he was dead. They were wrong. Jake spent those weeks traveling between refugee camps and hidden bases, helping where he could. He trained new recruits, sharing tips on survival and tactics. He delivered supplies to families crammed into overcrowded shelters. He listened to stories of loss and offered words of encouragement. He didn't wear a uniform or carry a rank. To most people, he was just another face in the crowd. But word got around. Soldiers recognized him. Civilians thanked him. Slowly, quietly, Jake built a network of supporters, people who believed in him, even if they didn't fully understand why. Then came the Peace Summit. Earth's leaders met with Solari representatives aboard a neutral station orbiting Mars. Both sides claimed they wanted to end the war. Both sides lied. The talks collapsed within hours, devolving into accusations and threats. When the Solari delegation walked out, humanity braced for the worst. And the worst came. The Solari launched a surprise assault on Earth's remaining colonies, targeting key cities and industrial hubs. Billions died in days. Panic spread across the planet, turning streets into chaos. Governments scrambled to respond, but their efforts were disorganized and ineffective. The enemy was too strong, too fast. Amid the destruction, Jake emerged from hiding. He didn't announce his return or give speeches. He simply showed up where he was needed most. Leading small teams of volunteers, he struck behind enemy lines, sabotaging supply depots, disabling weapons systems, and disrupting communication networks. Each strike weakened the Solari grip, buying humanity precious time to regroup. One night, Jake led a daring raid on a heavily fortified Solari command center. His team consisted of inexperienced fighters, farmers, mechanics, teachers, ordinary people driven to fight for their homes. Jake trained them quickly, drilling them on stealth and teamwork. Then they moved in under cover of darkness. The operation was risky. The odds were stacked against them. But Jake didn't care about odds. He cared about results. They infiltrated the base silently, taking out guards one by one. Inside, they planted explosives around critical systems. As the charges detonated, Jake's team slipped away, disappearing into the shadows before the Solari realized what had happened. The attack crippled the Solari's regional command structure, forcing them to divert resources to repair the damage. It also sent a message: humanity wasn't finished yet. Back on Earth, the public learned of Jake's exploits not through official reports, but through whispers and rumors. Stories spread of a lone Marine who refused to give up, who inspired others to stand and fight. People started calling him ** the Whisper * again, but this time. The nickname carried pride instead of fear. Command couldn't ignore him anymore. Officers begged him to return to active duty, offering promotions and medals. Politicians invited him to speak at rallies, promising support and funding. Jake turned them all down. He didn't need titles or promises. What he needed was action. So he kept fighting, not for glory or recognition, but for survival, for hope, for everyone who still believed in a future free from war. As the battles raged on, Jake's legend grew. Soldiers painted his name on their armor. Civilians chanted it during protest. Even the Zalari couldn't escape it. High-ranking officials issued orders to capture him alive, vowing to make an example of him. But Jake stayed one step ahead, slipping through their grasp like smoke. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't perfect. He bled like anyone else. But he never gave up, never stopped believing. Because that's what grunts did. They held the line. They endured. They survived. And sometimes, just sometimes, they won. Would you like me to format this into a separate document, e.g., .docx or .pdf? Let me know. Years passed. The war with the Zalari dragged on, stretching humanity to its limits. Cities burned, colonies fell, billions died, but slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. Humanity clawed its way back from the brink, driven by determination and sacrifice, and at the heart of it all was Jake Harlow. Jake didn't lead armies or command fleets. He wasn't a general or a politician. He was just a soldier, a grunt who refused to quit. But his actions inspired others. His courage gave people hope. Wherever he went, the fight grew stronger. Not because of weapons or technology, but because of belief. The final battle came on a distant planet called Epsilon 3. It was a barren world, scarred by centuries of conflict. The Zalari had turned it into a fortress, their strongest stronghold, outside their home system. If humanity wanted to win the war, they had to take it down. Command planned the assault for months. Thousands of soldiers trained for the mission. Ships gathered in orbit, bristling with firepower. Leaders delivered speeches, promising victory or death, trying. Everyone knew this was it. The last stand. Jake joined the fight quietly, slipping onto one of the transport ships without fanfare. No one noticed him at first. He wasn't wearing insignias or carrying fancy gear. Just a rifle, a knife, and the same stubborn resolve that had kept him alive all these years. When the invasion began, chaos erupted. The Zalari fought fiercely, defending their stronghold with everything they had. Human forces pushed forward, inch by bloody inch, but progress was slow. Casualties mounted fast. It seemed like the battle might end in stalemate until Jake appeared. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't call for attention. He simply moved through the battlefield, helping where he could. When a squad got pinned down, he flanked the enemy and provided cover fire. When a wounded soldier needed rescue, he carried them to safety. When morale faltered, he reminded everyone why they were fighting. His presence spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered his name, pointing him out to each other. Civilians hiding in underground bunkers prayed for his success. Even the Zalari felt his impact, their commanders issuing frantic orders to stop him. But Jake couldn't be stopped. He was everywhere and nowhere all at once. By the third day of the battle, the human forces breached the outer defenses of the Zalari fortress. Inside, the fighting grew even fiercer. Corridors became kill zones. Rooms turned into traps. Every step forward cost lives. But Jake pressed on, leading small teams deeper into the heart of the stronghold. Finally, they reached the central chamber, a massive room filled with alien machinery and glowing consoles. This was the nerve center of the entire fortress, the hub controlling every system and defense. Destroying it would bring the whole structure crashing down. Jake set explosives around the chamber, working quickly despite the constant threat of ambush. His team held position, keeping watch for any sign of trouble. When the charges were ready, Jake gave the signal to retreat. As they backed away, the explosives detonated, sending shockwaves through the fortress. Lights flickered. Alarms blared. Then the walls collapsed, burying the chamber and the Zalari inside under tons of rubble. The fortress fell soon after. Without its central control, the defenses crumbled. Human forces poured in, securing the area and hunting down any remaining enemies. By nightfall, the battle was over. Humanity had won, but Jake wasn't there to celebrate. After setting the explosives, he slipped away, disappearing into the ruins. Some assumed he'd been killed in the collapse. Others thought he'd gone rogue again. Few realized the truth. Jake didn't want recognition. He never had. Back on Earth, news of the victory spread like wildfire. People danced in the streets, cheering and crying tears of relief. Governments declared holidays. Monuments rose in cities across the globe, honoring those who had sacrificed so much. At the base of each monument, the same inscription appeared, greater than. Asterisk, they thought he was just another grunt, until the stars trembled at his name. Asterisk, for years afterward, rumors swirled about Jake Harlow. Some claimed he'd retired to a quiet life, living off-grid and avoiding attention. Others said he'd joined resistance groups, continuing to fight against injustice wherever it arose. A few believed he still led covert missions, operating outside official jurisdiction. No one knew for sure. Jake didn't leave clues. He didn't seek fame. All he left behind was a legacy, a story told by survivors and passed down through generations. Children grew up hearing tales of the grunt, who became a legend. Parents told bedtime stories of the soldier who defied odds, outsmarted enemies, and inspired millions. Statues carved from wreckage stood tall, not as memorials to glory, but as reminders of resilience. On every plaque, the same words echoed, greater than. Asterisk, they thought he was just another grunt, until the stars trembled at his name. Asterisk, and somewhere, far away, Jake Harlow smiled. Not because of the statues or the stories, but because he'd done what mattered most. He'd fought for something bigger than himself. He'd given people hope. He'd shown them that even in the darkest times, humanity could endure. Because that's what grunts did. They held the line. They endured. They survived. And sometimes, just sometimes, they changed the galaxy. Would you like me to format this into a separate document, e.g., .docx or .pdf? Let me know.